Hello everyone, welcome back. Recently, Bob and I talked a lot about SSH private keys. Today, we're going to continue from there. And I heard Bob just got a new computer.
Yep. And I want to transfer my SSH key pair from the old computer to the new one. I guess I can just copy both the private and public key files into the .ssh folder on the new one?
That's perfectly right, but there's something good to know. The private key is the pivot or the core in the key pair. Even if you don't have the public key, you can regenerate it from the private key. I think, Bob, you still remember the command we used to generate SSH key pair, SSH-keygen. With the same command, you can get the public key from the private key file. Of course, you need to tell the command you would like to produce or yield the public key with an option -y. And you have to tell the command SSH keygen from which private key you want to yield the public key with option -f. After F, you add a space and the location of the private key. The whole thing prints the public key to the standard output, typically the screen. It is recommended to redirect the output into a file like this.
I see. So I don't really need to back up the public key?
Typically, no, but keeping it is still helpful. For example, public key files often include a comment at the end of the file, like an email address, which helps identify whose key it is. If you regenerate the public key from the private key file, you need to add that comment manually.
Where is that comment information stored?
It is in the public key file itself, just a string of the key data. You can add or edit it freely with any editor. I think you still remember when we created the SSH key pair with command SSH keygen, we used option -C and followed by the comment information. Option C just appends the comment information after the key data in the generated public key file.
Okay, it seems command SSH-keygen is really versatile. I think I saw another option -L with this command somewhere. What does option -L do?
The answer to your question is it requires the SSH keygen to generate the fingerprint based on a public key or a private key. Fingerprint here means a hash of a public key. The public key is usually long string. However, the fingerprint is relatively shorter and human-friendly, especially for comparison. You can consider the fingerprint is the ID of a public key.
Okay, I am still a little bit confused. Where does the fingerprint come from?
That's fine, Bob. I will explain this with an example. Let's say command SSH keygen -L-F followed by the position of the private key. If the public key file with the same file name as the private key file and with suffix name .pub exists under the same folder, command SSH keygen will use the public key file directly instead of the designated private key file. If there is a comment information in the public key file, the comment information will be printed out with the fingerprint together. If command SSH keygen couldn't find the matching public key file, the command derives the public key from the private key file and generates the fingerprint. Of course, no comment information this time. That is why it is good to keep the key pair with the matching names, so tools like SSH keygen can find both files and show you the full information.
So, the fingerprint is always the same, whether it comes from the public or private key?
Yes, as long as the keys match, fingerprints represent the public key, which is mathematically derived from the private key.
Okay, I see. I have transferred my key pair to the new computer. I think it is time to log in the SSH server as usual. However, I still remember the first logging in. It seems I was asked to accept something. I just simply typed yes.
When you try to connect to a new server for the very first time, or you have a brand new computer, your SSH client shows you the fingerprint from the server, asking, "Are you sure you want to continue connecting?" The fingerprint that you have seen identifies the server's public key, kind of like a digital ID. Now you have the opportunity to check whether this is the correct server that you plan to log in by comparing the fingerprint, if you have one, via some secure communication tunnel with the one showing on the screen. At this moment, you have three options. The first one is you type in no if you are quite sure this is not the correct server, so you reject the server. The second one is when you have the correct fingerprint via a secure tunnel, you can simply paste in the fingerprint that you have and enter. There will be a comparison between your fingerprint and the one from the server. If they match, you will see this. And right now you can log in. The third one is you absolutely trust this server, so you can simply type yes, then you can log in. Once you have logged in successfully, the public keys from the server will be stored on your computer in .ssh known_hosts. That way, on future connections, it checks if the server's identity matches one of them. That is the reason why you would just seen this prompt only for the first time logging in.
I got it. It seems there is another file as known_hosts.old. I guess it would be a backup file for the file known_hosts.
Yes, exactly. Once you have new public keys to keep in file known_hosts, the original content in this file would be copied into the backup file.
It seems I only can see the fingerprint of the SSH server when I would like to log in the server.
Actually, there is another way to check the public key without logging in. The command is SSH key scan. The command is simple and it will fetch the public key for you, not the fingerprint. For example, your server has port 2223, so you need to mention it with option -P 2223 in the command. And since it is recommended to use type ED 25519, you need to mention this with option -T. If you don't narrow down the outputs by specifying the type, you will get all the types of the public keys from the server. If you still would like to get the fingerprint, you need to use the command SSH keygen with option -L to translate the public key into fingerprint. Here is a typical example. With the vertical bar, you can connect the output of the former command to the input of the latter command. And the dash at the end of the whole thing is indicating the location of the public key is actually from the standard input as the screen.
Okay, you mentioned there were several public keys from the SSH server. I am interested in where they are on the server. I think probably there are the type ED 25519 and RSA at least.
I think you still remember the configuration file for the SSH server. The location is under /SSH on the server. All the public keys are under the same folder. We can take a look together.
Oh yes, I have seen them, not only the types that I have mentioned. However, I've seen files like private keys.
Yes, they are private key files. The SSH server can prove its identity with them. When you connect, your client challenges the server, and the server uses its private key to sign a response. The client verifies the signature with the public key it has stored in the known_hosts file.
So if the server loses its private key?
Then it can't prove it is the same server anymore. The clients will get a warning or reject the connection because the identity has changed.
Just like how I can't authenticate without my own private key.
Exactly. SSH is a mutual trust system. The server proves it is genuine, and you prove you're authorized, usually with your own private key.
Awesome. I feel like I understand SSH keys much better now.